you and share with you briefly some things that we've done in our attempts to implement Common Core at Spring Valley High School as well as within the district. We're all aware the implementation of Common Core state standards will require an educational shift and change in pedagogical practices. Students will no longer be assessed on surface and procedural knowledge, but more on depth and conceptual knowledge. And in order to make this shift successfully, we have to provide ongoing professional development to those individuals who will be on the front line of this educational transformation. So we believe that the primary focus of the professional development should take place with the classroom teacher. And the classroom teacher must be at the center and serve as a foundation during this transition. This will require the building of capacity among our teachers and teacher leaders within our schools. To do this, all school-based Common Core implementation teams were required to have both school administrators and classroom teachers as members. Each team has and will continue to take part in ongoing professional development provided by the district. Teams are responsible for going back to their respective schools and providing professional development for their faculties and staff. So our first task in this planning of this event was to we decided to have a three focused round robin groups at Spring Valley. Our rationale for the round robins was that the smaller groups of teachers would promote larger ideas that are practical versus the large whole group faculty approach where ideas and collaboration may be limited. In our planning, we assigned the implementation team members, Mr. Owens and Ms. Roberson, along with our ITS specialists, the task of planning 3 sessions. We had a session that focused on formative assessments and instructional feedback that was led by Ms. Roberson, the 8th mathematical practices that was led by Mr. Owens, and voice thread and close reading that was led by Catherine Robertson, our ITS specialist. They planned collaboratively with other teachers outside of their content areas. So this is something that was not just simply done within mathematics, but we brought in teachers from outside of those contents so they could plan collaboratively and get different viewpoints. The implementation team members, along with their selected peers, planned the logistics out over 2 to 3 weeks during our PEP our Wednesday morning PEP sessions in preparation for leading the October 17th professional development. On November 4th, at our district implementation team meeting, our data confirmed that the success of each session with the comments and blogs and testimonies from our teachers stating and attesting to the fact that our PD and planning stages were well worth it and it was possible and probably the best in-service that they've had in a very long time. So tonight we have our implementation team members here, 2 of them that is, and the members will share their experience in leading the Spring Valley faculty to the Common Core shifts for instruction in all classrooms.
Good evening, Dr. Ham, board members, and other stakeholders of the district. My name is Felicia Robeson again, and I was heading up the formal assessment content of this October 17th formative assessment. And like Dr. Davis said, we had to plan together. That was really exciting for me because we're always teaching in isolation, and one of the things as an educator, I love picking brains of other educators. So the logistics of getting us all together, it was 2 English teachers, myself and another teacher, and 2 social studies teachers. And our conversation was all about, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this for teachers? What are you doing? And what are we doing? How can we put this together? So it was really fun to get with them and plan our presentation. The involvement, again, was the social studies and the English department because in conversation, we found out that we teach a lot of things, but like I said, we teach it in isolation. And for us to have these conversations and to move successfully in the shift that Common Core wants us to move, we got to start having these conversations. The common goal, again, is to take what we do, our content, put it together, and use each other's talents into, bringing us into this shift. The day of October 17th was fun for us. We started off with, we had to make sure that we had a mixed table of different disciplines, because a lot of times when teachers come together, we all sit with our own departments, with our friends, and we strategically set it up to where there would be social studies, arts, math, science, all at the same table that would kind of force them to come together and bring their different ideas. We had an icebreaker, which was about feedback, because that's what formative assessment is. That was fun as well. The information was a PowerPoint about formative assessment. This is something we all do, but again, going into Common Core, we had to be reminded of why it's important. And we ended it with a cross-curricular activity. We used the text of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. The gist of the presentation, real quickly, formative assessment. We talked about Dylan William. If you've done any research on Dylan William, he is the guru of formative assessment. And we showed a clip of him talking about why formative assessment is important. And I had to remind the teachers, this is not my presentation, this is not our presentation, this is all of us. And we are all doing formative assessment, and we had to be reminded of how important it is that we assess the learning. It's not so much about the teaching, it is about the learning that we have to put in the forefront. What are our students doing? What is it looking like? We also talked about, I kind of broke it up into old school and new school. We're moving into the technology. We still have people who like to do whiteboards and question and observations. But then we have a lot of teachers who are moving into the Google Forms and VoiceThread and things like that. So it was fun to have everybody in there because everybody had a different aspect of what they could bring as far as technology is concerned. And it was very good that everybody could voice, what are we doing in the classrooms? We ended the presentation with, and it was a 2-hour session, we ended the 2-hour session with a close reading and cross-curricular activity using a single text, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And out of that conversation was something that was born. I don't know if any of you have read the book, but an idea was really birthed that day through the faculty. We are excited about coming together and making this shift and teaching in a different way. We were able to, as each table was able to look at this single text, bring his or her own discipline into it. And there was a lot of conversation, a lot of excitement about how an art teacher can get with the English teacher, how the science teacher can get with the social studies teacher. And so it was a great day, and I will turn it over to Mr. Owens.
Greetings, I'm Matt Owens, math teacher at Spring Valley High School and the instructional leader of the mathematics department at Spring Valley. As you know, the mathematics for the Common Core nationwide is going to take on a new look with the 8 mathematical practices that teachers and students should be implementing and articulating and practicing in the classroom. And these are the 8 pillars of math instruction that is going to require a shift from teachers and student standpoints: making sense of problems and persevering in solving them, reasoning abstractly, having our kids to create viable arguments and modeling mathematics, using technologies and tools strategically, making use of structures and algebras and different types of mathematics and attending to precision. So what we did at Spring Valley, we wanted to look at the mathematical practices universally. And we have held district implementation meetings, and I actually led one, and I came back with the idea to Spring Valley of how can we implement the 8 mathematical practices in all classrooms. And I remember Ms. Millette at the last meeting showing the snapshot of the 8 mathematical practices. So in my session, I wanted to make the mathematical practices appeal to the senses. Now, of course, we can't taste the mathematical practices nor smell them, so I decided I would look at the 3. So what I did was did a sounds activity with the teachers, and I went into 5 random classrooms that were not math classrooms, and I did a recording of the teachers and students talk and accountable talk and discourse. And the teachers actually heard the mathematical practices in other disciplines. So we at Spring Valley feel that this is something we are already doing. We're just not as cognizant of the framework. So I then led into a touching or tactile activity with the jigsaw puzzle where teachers actually matched up questions with the particular practices. And that was fun for the teachers. And also we saw a video segment of a Common Core lesson from an Indiana classroom that is already live. So the outcomes, Spring Valley now recognizes that the mathematical practices are universal. These are not tools and practices just restricted to the math classroom. We are working on a document right now at Spring Valley where all departments can contribute to how the 8 practices apply to their content areas. And we are very proud to know that our teachers know that this does require a professional shift. And we are also looking at implementing and posting in the classroom posters of the 8 mathematical practices. And we are excited with the English department, who diligently is working on a document to create their own 8 English practices for the Viking Common Core. So we are excited that the district implementation Common Core teams have dwindled down into the high school of Spring Valley, and those initiatives that were at the district level are at Spring Valley. To conclude this presentation, we would like to show you a video of some of the segments recorded during that day of October 17th, and we hope that you enjoy this short presentation.
You ready for questions?
I was just going to say, are there any questions?
Okay, board members, any questions for Dr. Davis or the staff?
Mr. Chairman, I saw a lot of charts and a lot of writing. Obviously, couldn't read what was on them. Would you tell me sort of briefly, were you discussing teaching strategies, developing assessment rubrics? What exactly were you having the teachers work on that ended up being on a chart and being posted throughout the room on that day? What kinds of things, just briefly?
The 8 mathematical practices, I assembled 8 different groups, and the teachers across all disciplines, about 5 per table, were all at a table, and each table was responsible for a particular mathematical practice. So the teachers basically had to read the Common Core document from the Common Core website and see how those particular practices or that particular practice applies to their classroom. So the more variety at the table, the more variety of the strategies posted on the particular chart papers.
And so the follow-up from that in terms of taking what they did and being able to apply it in their classroom, how and when is that going to happen?
It's already happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was a reinforcement of that then?
This is a reinforcement for the math teachers, I know, in the math department, but it's also something kind of new to the science teachers and other disciplines where mathematics is clearly linked to the particular content area.
Thank you.
One of the things that we're attempting is, first we have to get a good working knowledge of what the Common Core standards are asking. And so by having the conversations across curriculum, teachers get the chance to see that these standards are not just in mathematics or just in ELA, but they're transferable across all content areas, including our K classes. Even in those presentations, we had several of our K teachers participating and talking about how these standards are relatable in their classes. So once we're able to have a good working understanding as a school, then we can start developing assessments and then measuring those assessments and asking the question, does this assessment measure what the Common Core State Standard is asking that we measure? But before we can get to the point of being able to write assessments or even identify appropriate assessments, we have to have a really good understanding or working knowledge of what the standard is asking of us. That conversation that you saw taking place in mathematics and also in our English and even in the technology sessions is the beginning of that process. So,
I thought, though, that this past summer, or even maybe last summer, I thought we had already developed the assessment piece that at least we were considering using it as a part of the map testing. I thought so. I thought we had part of that already in place. Am I incorrect? You said before you can begin that you have to do. I thought we had already developed some of that.
So I think some of that has been developed, but when we're talking about authentic assessments in the classroom,
Right.
teachers need to have the ability to be able to generate and select authentic assessments and not standardized assessments like you would see on map testing. You know, they have to be able to give quizzes and be able to give tests from the content that they're delivering. So they have to have an understanding what that standard is asking so that they can write and collaborate amongst each other. For example, in, say, Algebra 1 Part 2, what is an authentic Algebra 1 Part 2 type assessment that is similar to a standardized question? Because there may not be a test bank that will be able to provide us with those types of questions. So they need to be able to have the capacity to be able to do that collaboratively within our building.
And will the assessment begin next year since the real one begins in 2016?
Well, we've already started the process of generating
assessment.
Yes, sir. The authentic assessments. That's what this conversation is about. So as we start to develop our own assessment type questions, we can then in our professional early planning sessions sit down and look at these questions and ask, okay, we asked this same question in all of the Algebra 1 classes. What do we see as a result of this type of question? One, is it a good question? Two, how did our students perform on this? And three, what do we need to do next to make sure that our students are able to answer these questions with the depth that's required for Common Core?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Barron.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a comment and a question. One, I applaud you. I think formative assessment, and I think many of the folks on the board can speak to the fact that I've been asking about more formative assessment within our district and how we use it. Do we know our teachers are given good tests and that we're truly measuring where our students are going in a way that the data is usable? And so I applaud you guys for doing that. I hope that all of our schools are making this foray. But to back up Mr. Jackson's statement about map testing, I do seem to remember that we said that there were some formative assessments, that Common Core-based formative assessments that we could use to gauge where we were with the Common Core. And so, Mr. Jackson, I think that may be what you were asking.
That's correct.
And I would like to know, when do we start seeing those, and when do we start seeing those results? And that may not be.
Well, with high school map, it's going to be limited because we're not going to really have map testing at the high school level for the exception of 9th grade, possibly. So we're going to have to develop assessments for our our kids are taking econ and government, and there are no assessments that are standardized that's going to do that for us. So that's why we're not having abandoned those assessments, but the majority of the courses taught at the high school level, we would have to be able to develop those assessments for ourselves, or find appropriate standardized questions that are Common Core like questions.